Oh, it's live now.
All right. All right. So, hello everyone. This is Tristan Morrison, and
Hi guys.
I am Jose Marti, physician assistant at Delta Orthopedics. We're here just having a show about workers' comp. We just want to cover any questions that you guys may have. So feel free to send some questions on the chat. And also, if you just want to tune in, we'll just have some basic workers' comp questions here that Tristan is going to help us um, answer today. And I'm going to jump in from a medical standpoint. Tristan is going to come in from a attorney at law standpoint, and Amanda is going to help us chime in when she gets a chance. She's having a little bit of technical difficulties, but she'll get through it. All right. So Tristan, without further ado, let's jump in the first question. Okay. So first question. After a work accident, so I'm hurt, what do I do? Whatever that may be, is a fall, a slip, is I hammer my thumb, or whatever it is. What is the first thing that the typical patient or client would do?
So if you're an employee, chances are your employer has workers' compensation insurance. And that's no fault insurance. It's there to cover you if you get hurt at work. And so the most important thing for you to do when you get hurt, particularly if it's a real serious injury, is to make sure that you've reported it to a manager or supervisor, somebody who has authority at the company. And, we kind of follow the CYA method, which is to say that you want to do it in a way that you can prove you did it, because the concern always from a legal standpoint is, whether or not somebody's going to claim later that the accident didn't get reported or that it didn't happen there at work. So I always recommend to folks that, if you get into an accident at work, and it's not really super obvious, like if you fall off a ladder and you have an accident where they have to bring an ambulance in and take you to the hospital, everybody knows you had an accident.
Right.
But if you're doing a bunch of lifting on an assembly line and your back pops, that's not really obvious. You need to let somebody know. And so texting or emailing your boss and saying, hey, I got hurt at work today, and it was really bothering me. Is there anywhere I can go to get medical care?
Right.
I need some help. And that way there's no question about the fact that you got hurt at work. I recommend that you list every single body part that hurts in that email or text. So there's no question about what you reported.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you so much. So the next step is a big one. At what point do we involve the attorney? At what point? Is it at the beginning, somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the end? What's the most efficient and suitable way of going about that?
That's a great question. When you have a really minor injury, cuts, scrapes, bruises, you probably don't need a lawyer for that. I mean, that's the kind of thing we all deal with on a daily basis. I would say that anytime you have a major injury and you think you might need surgery or you're on your way to the hospital, that's the time when you don't want to hesitate to get a lawyer involved. I think it's important for people to remember that you end up paying a lawyer the same amount, regardless of whether or not you get them involved at the very beginning or at the end of your case. It's always going to be a contingency for an injury case,
right.
Meaning that the attorney's got to get you something before they get paid.
Right.
And if they're working on that from the beginning, then you get the benefit of that attorney's knowledge and experience from the moment you get hurt all the way through the case. But if you bring them in at the end, just for them to negotiate a settlement, you're going to pay them the same amount, but you get a worse result because you haven't had the benefit of their help the whole time. So you want to get an attorney involved real early if it looks like a major injury.
Okay. And to that same token, Tristan, so how does when it comes to paying the attorney from a workers' comp, how does that work? Do you guys deal in the back end with workers' comp themselves, with the workers' comp rep? How does the patient or client, in your case, how does it go about?
With workers' compensation, it's pretty simple. It's not like personal injury. Personal injury, the fee contract can be very different from attorney to attorney, different percentages before it gets into litigation, after it gets into litigation. With workers' compensation, the law is set by the legislature. The work comp attorney gets paid 25% of what they get for you, excluding medical. And that's regardless of whether or not it's a baby lawyer who just got out of law school or somebody who's been handling catastrophic claims for 20 years, 30 years. It's all attorneys get paid the same amount on workers' compensation claims. So you want to choose somebody who's got a lot of experience, somebody who's maybe even been on both sides of the bar, somebody who used to do insurance defense and used to teach insurance companies how to handle these things.
Right.
So they know all the dirty little tricks that insurance companies play.
Right.
Avoid those.
That's good to know. So, and from my end, from the medical side, I'd say that it's very important to us to know that this may possibly turn into a workers' comp claim, or it is a workers' comp claim as soon as possible, because the sooner that we know, the sooner that we can start tailoring everything that we do, particularly on our notes, to that. And especially if we need to get any approvals for certain imaging, certain modalities, certain treatment, it's very important that we understand where we stand. Okay, let's move on to the next question, guys. So now I have an attorney. When do I need to be checked medically? So you start, and then I'll tell you. So I got hurt. Do I need to get checked medically right away? Do I wait? Do I wait a few days? Do I wait a few weeks? Right? Because we see that a lot, right, Tristan?
Yeah, it's not as bad with workers' compensation as it is with personal injury. If you get in a car wreck, you need to go to the doctor right away, because a jury someday is going to see that and say, if you were really hurt, why didn't you go to the doctor?
Exactly.
With workers' compensation, you don't have as much control over your medical care. You report the accident to your supervisor. What they're supposed to do is they're supposed to, go and get you a copy of what's called the posted panel of physicians. It's a list of doctors that you can see after you get hurt at work. They're not supposed to just tell you go to the Concentra or go to the local urgent care. They're supposed to give you a choice. And I highly, highly recommend that you choose somebody who's not in urgent care, because the urgent cares are quite frequently working closely with the insurance companies. I think orthopedic doctors, such as yourselves, are a great first choice. I know that sounds self-serving, but at the same time, a clinic is not going to have your best interest at heart.
Right.
The doctor will. So, it's better to start off right with a doctor, because you only get one change. If you are within that list of doctors and the employer has it posted correctly, if you don't like that doctor, you only get to change once. So
right.
I think it's important to go get care early, but also to be very careful in choosing the right doctor. And, frankly, calling a doctor like you to get some advice about what kind of care you need is not a bad idea. And calling a lawyer to find out, hey, who should I choose from this list?
Right.
That's a great time to call a lawyer. In fact, we get a lot of calls from people who have been, shown a list of doctors and they don't know who to pick. So they call us, or, they go to a doctor and that doctor's care recommendations aren't being approved.
Right.
And they need help getting approval. They're not getting a check every week like they're supposed to be getting. That's when we get phone calls.
That's something that it's great that you mentioned, Tristan, because it is pretty often that the attorney knows, in my opinion, a lot of the providers that deal with workers' comp in this particular in the area, and they can they already have a decent experience of, I worked with this guy before, they've been awesome, or I worked with this person before and they've been okay, so it's good to get that knowledge from somebody that has dealt with them firsthand.
That's true. I mean, as a injured worker, you don't know which lawyers are good, you don't know which doctors are good. It's very difficult to tell from the internet, because on the internet, just whoever's paying the most for advertising is who you're going to find first. So, getting a professional opinion, it's not a bad idea for patients to ask doctors, like, hey, who's a good lawyer? And for patients to ask lawyers, hey, who's a good doctor?
Right. Exactly. All right, Amanda, it seems like you're ready to jump in.
So I have some questions. So does the attorney typically recommend an orthopedic treatment or a chiropractic treatment first?
It really depends on the accident. With minor car accidents, where it doesn't look like somebody's going to need surgery, I think chiropractic care is fine to start off with. Workers' compensation, generally speaking, the insurance companies don't like to authorize chiropractic care. They'd rather see people get physical therapy.
Oh, interesting.
And so typically what the insurance company wants to do on a work comp case is they want, excuse me, they want the employer to push people towards clinics, because these clinics get a lot of their business from insurance companies, and they have protocols that are not very patient friendly. So they want the injured worker to get pushed over to a clinic, and the clinic will say, "Oh, you're fine, go back to work." And then they'll make them jump through all these hoops before they can finally get to an orthopedic group. And really, orthopedic groups are, they're the experts. They're the ones who have the medical training, the folks who are going to be able to provide serious care beyond, rubbing you down and telling you to head back to work. And, they're the folks who can give you the injections, or they can recommend physical therapy. They can, if you need surgery, they can put you in touch with a surgeon. So, I personally prefer to get orthopedists involved early, because I don't want to be involved as a lawyer in little bitty cases. Like if somebody's got a scratch on their knee, that's not the case I want to handle. I want to handle the cases where somebody's been catastrophically injured and they need serious care, and they need to be sent to orthopedic specialists, and and sometimes there's burn care, or sometimes there's neurology, the real true experts.
Yeah. And from a medical side, guys, it takes a while a lot of times to make people better. And when they already haven't gotten the care that we would hope for right off the bat, and then they just kind of wait until that time comes. It's 2 weeks, 3 weeks until that care happens. That's that much longer that it's going to take us to make that person better. So that's really something that we need to keep in mind when choosing that type of care, and it might just be that choosing still going to the orthopedic realm or field, but also adding, physical therapy or chiropractic care to that extent, completely acceptable. But at the very least, you have that primary type of physician or provider involved that is kind of like quarterbacking the whole medical side of things, and then from then on we can kind of just add as we need to.
And I don't want to knock chiropractors. I think there's some of them are doing fantastic work.
Right.
I agree. Chiropractors, and
I agree.
They're often a good they're like first responders in a way in the orthopedic world.
Very often, actually.
Yeah. And it's often a chiropractor who will recognize that somebody needs more serious care beyond chiropractic care. It's often the chiropractor who's referring people out for their first MRI, or identifies something more serious and notifies the patient, "Hey, you really should have somebody take a look at this."
So Tristan, in question, if I have a workers' comp injury, and I get a lawyer for that, and the list of doctors that I basically have to go to, if I go to one of the doctors and I'm just not getting the kind of care that I want or feel like, or you don't feel like is good, is there any way to fight that list of doctors that is provided by the office, or wherever it is that you're working? Or is it kind of like that's it, like there's no other option?
It depends on whether or not they do it correctly. The list of doctors has to be posted in a prominent location, accessible to all the employees. The employer is supposed to educate employees about how to use the panel after they get hurt. They're not supposed to pick the doctor for the employee. And if they do enough things wrong, then the employee is free to choose their own doctor. And, often it takes a lawyer getting involved to figure out whether or not the employer has handled the panel correctly, and whether or not you can pierce the panel, as they call it, get beyond those doctors that are the insurance company's favorites.
Got it.
There's also, if you're getting income benefits, if you're hurt and you're out of work for more than the 21 days before they have to start paying you, within 120 days of your last payment, you can get a one-time expert evaluation with a doctor of your choice if you request what's called a statutory independent medical examination. It's a fancy way of saying that you get to pick a doctor of your own choice to evaluate you and find out what your care needs are,
Mm-hmm,
so that if you need to, you can go in front of the judge and say, hey, my work comp doctor says this, but I have an independent doctor
Right,
that says something else. And, I really feel more comfortable with the treatment plan that the independent doctor says I need.
That's great information. That's great information.
Awesome. Okay, so it looks like we have a comment. Andrea is asking, what can I do if I get fired after my work accident?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So first of all, the employer usually is not going to want to fire you after a work accident, because if you get hurt and you're out of work and they fire you, well, then they're stuck with their insurance company paying you benefits every week until they either try to bring you back on light duty and offer you a job, or you go back to work somewhere else, or the doctor releases you to regular duty. So most of the time you won't get fired for having a work accident. There's a lot of states that have anti-retaliation statutes. Georgia's not one of them, but in other states, it's actually against the law to fire somebody for exercising their rights under the Workers' Compensation Act. I kind of wish they would do that in Georgia too.
That's surprising that's not like a federal thing.
Well, there is a federal thing. The state thing is what we'd like to have. We'd like to have Georgia step in and say, hey, it's against the law to fire somebody for exercising their right to workers' compensation. That would be nice to see, the Georgia legislature.
Would that go against Georgia's firing at will state law, or the one are two completely different ones?
There's some, they play with each other. Having an at-will employee means essentially, to kind of break it down, having an at-will employee means that as long as you don't fire somebody for a federally protected reason, then you can fire people for pretty much whatever you want. They show up late, they don't tie their shoes, they're sloppy, things that maybe don't really warrant termination, but that's the employer's choice. Now, there's a lot of federal laws that say you can't terminate people for various reasons, like their race, the national origin, pregnancy, disability, all sorts of various factors. And so those laws protect folks, against employment discrimination. There's also a federal law called the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act.
Right.
And if your employer is big enough and you've been working there long enough, then if you get hurt or a family member has a serious medical condition, then the employer is required to give you unpaid leave for a period of time, several months. And so they have to, give you the FMLA paperwork. You'll take it to your doctor. Your doctor will fill it out to say, yes, this is a serious health condition. And then they're required to hold your job for you. They're not required to pay you, but they're required to hold the job for you. So you can be out on FMLA leave while you're also getting workers' compensation. And the federal law says they have to hold your job for you, but it's not paid leave. The state law from Georgia says they do have to pay you while you're out if you got hurt at work. So we'll talk a little bit more about the fact that there's a lot of these laws that can apply, multiple laws apply to the same situation. Like, for example, you can have a personal injury claim and a workers' compensation claim that both arise out of the same accident.
So just to kind of backtrack to the original question, what do I do if I get fired after a work accident? It seems like it doesn't benefit the employer. So for you to get fired would be unlikely. And two, it doesn't really seem like it affects your benefits as a work comp injury. Is that right?
Basically, it can affect your benefits. Depends on why they're firing you and whether or not it's pretextual. The reality is the short answer to your question is, if you get fired at work because you've had an accident, call a lawyer. If you even think you're going to get fired at work for having an accident, call a lawyer before you get fired, because that lawyer can help you lay the groundwork to have a better case when you do get fired.
Right.
Got it. All right, great. So what if my accident wasn't anyone's fault?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about workers' compensation, is that it is a no-fault system. Way back when, during the Industrial Revolution, we had all these folks working in factories, losing arms and legs and suing their employers for negligence, the employee would say, well, my employer was negligent because they put me in this situation where I shouldn't have been, or the machine I was working on was dangerous, and they'd sue their employer. And the employer would say, well, you assumed the risk. You knew that there was a big machine there, and you came to work for us. And so if you got hurt, tough luck. And so you'd either have the employee getting nothing, or you'd have the employee getting these great big judgments against employers. And so the various states stepped in and said, well, we need a system where it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. If an employee gets hurt at work, they're going to get something. It's not going to be personal injury damages. There's no pain and suffering in workers' compensation, unfortunately, but there is a baseline of benefits that you get. And it doesn't matter if it's your fault. It doesn't matter if it's the employer's fault. And in turn, what the employer gets is essentially protection from lawsuits, from tort suits, personal injury suits. It's called exclusive remedy. So workers' compensation is your exclusive remedy against your employer and your coworkers. And there may be situations where third parties can be sued for tort, but in Georgia, as in pretty much all states, the only thing you can do with regard to your employer is get workers' compensation.
Tristan, this is great information. This is I'm getting golden nuggets left and right as a previous employee and as an employer now. Like all this information, it serves both ways. This is great. This is really good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question in there.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So what if the accident was my fault? So it kind of seems like you already answered that question. It's a no fault kind of situation, right?
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about it is, even if it's completely your fault that you got hurt at work, that doesn't matter. You can still get all the benefits that you're entitled to. I had a client once who lit himself on fire. He was putting gas in his pocket basically he was a guy who operated machines doing landscaping, and they'd have to go from the truck all the way down to wherever they were doing the landscaping. And they'd run out of gas, and they'd have to haul all their stuff back to the truck, gas it up, and then haul it back down to wherever they were doing the landscaping. Well, they were taking water bottles full of gas, water bottle you get at the grocery store. Right. They filled up with gas and put it in their pockets. And the guy was smoking a cigarette, and he had gas. And my
gosh.
And he was entitled to workers' compensation.
Wow.
Wow, that's wild. Holy cow.
Yeah. So,
wow.
Okay.
I bet you have stories for days, don't you? Yeah. I bet you have stories for days.
Wow. So can an employer fight it if they feel that the employee purposefully got themselves, hurt to just get workers' comp benefits and to kind of just be off for a time?
Yeah, I mean, that's fraud. So if somebody willfully hurts themselves, it's not a valid workers' compensation claim. And in fact, insurance companies have literally hundreds of defenses potentially to workers' compensation claims. I used to teach insurance companies all the defenses that they had. If somebody is doing drugs and that's the cause of their injury, if somebody is willfully disregarding certain safety protocols, their employer tells them over and over and over again, to wear safety gear that you not to.
Right.
Now, there's usually an exception to every defense. So just because your employer or your insurance company has told you, hey, we're not going to pay you work comp, that doesn't mean they're right. That's again, it's a good time to call lawyers.
Call a lawyer, right? Yeah.
Said, well, we don't think your claim's valid. Well, it might be.
Right. Yeah.
Another thing that we see a lot is folks who they get ground down over time. Somebody works on a jackhammer for 30 years. They might not have any particular moment when they have an injury, but over 30 years, they just get broken.
Right.
And so, I'll have people call me and say, hey, I want to apply for Social Security disability. And we'll say, well, what happened? How'd you get hurt? Mm-hmm. Well, I was operating a jackhammer for 30 years and now my bones are all mush. Well, that's a work accident. That's a cumulative gradual injury from work. And that's compensable. That's something that
from a medical side, we see it a lot. We see that a lot. and it's one of those things that the patient doesn't know what he or she doesn't know. It just kind of is what it is. So they never know to even go to an attorney. And to be honest, Tristan, a lot of providers, a lot of doctors don't know this stuff. They don't know that, hey, because we hear that a lot, right? And we don't know to say, hey, maybe you should sit down with an attorney and discuss this a little bit further. So that's a great point to mention, because it's very common. It's actually more common than you think.
That's true. I talk to doctors, and they're writing down degenerative changes on all their notes. Talking about people's spines and knees and stuff, and why somebody's body is breaking down matters a lot. And you're absolutely right. I think it's great to educate.
Sure.
The lawyers have to be educated about the medicine, and the doctors end up
right.
part-time lawyers.
Hey, Tristan, there's a question that came in, but I do have a question before we move on. Statute of limitations on workers' comp cases. How does that work, and how does it work if the patient or client has now changed a job or two, but the particular incident that can be attributed to this particular injury happened, 2 jobs ago or something like that?
That's actually a really great question. It doesn't matter how many jobs you've changed since the accident. That's not the important part. And there's actually a couple different statutes of limitations. And for everybody out there who doesn't know what that is, that's your deadline to file something, either in court or with the State Board of Workers' Compensation, to preserve your case. And generally speaking, the two most basic workers' compensation statutes of limitations are that you're supposed to report your injury to a supervisor or manager within 30 days. And then if nothing is done on your claim, then you need to file it within a year. Otherwise, it's completely barred. Once the insurance company gets involved and starts paying for your medical care or your income benefits, your weekly wage replacement benefits, then different statutes of limitations come into play, and that gets complicated. But for the most part, you need to report your accident within 30 days, and you need to make sure that something's filed within a year.
Within a year.
Yeah.
So the best way to do this is, I'm not sure what happened, but let me contact Tristan and see if I can still file or not.
Yep, absolutely. And there's times when cases have been open for years, and they're still alive because of the benefits that have been paid, even though nothing's been filed. So, and then I get other situations that are sad where, somebody's employer says, oh, well, don't worry, we'll take care of you. And they never reported to the insurance company. And then a couple years pass and somebody realizes, oh gosh, I'm not getting better. And then they call me and I have to tell them, look, it's too late. You got to do something sooner.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Okay, so the question that came in, can my employer take part of my check to pay for workers' compensation insurance?
So usually employers don't do that. Typically employers pay for their own workers' compensation insurance, and then they get audited every year by the insurance company. And however many employees you've added, you pay an additional amount. When somebody is taking money out of your check to pay for workers' compensation premiums, it's pretty useful to identify whether or not you are an independent contractor or an employee. Because one of the factors that the courts will look at, or the board will look at, if your employer is taking money out of your check to pay for work benefits, but then they turn around and try to claim, well, you're an independent contractor, we're not going to provide any workers' comp for you. Right. That's a red flag, and the board doesn't like to see that. So there are times when an employer can do that, particularly if you're like right on the border of whether or not you're an independent contractor or an employee. And an independent contractor usually gets a 1099 tax form. An employee usually gets a W-2 form. Generally, an independent contractor will sign some sort of contract that says, hey, I understand I'm not an employee and I have to pay for my own work comp insurance, or the employer is going to take out some money from my paycheck to pay for work comp insurance, but then it'll be there for me.
Right.
So usually when we get this question, it's because the employer is skirting the line between somebody being an actual employee versus a contractor.
Right.
And, if you've been hurt and there's a question about whether or not there's work comp insurance available for you, because your employer was pulling money out of your checks, but now all of a sudden that insurance isn't there, that's a good time to call a lawyer.
Right.
And it's interesting, in Georgia, basically, if you've got 3 employees, including the owners, then you have to have work comp insurance. And if you don't, it's actually a crime.
Oh, wow.
A criminal statute. It's very infrequently and poorly enforced, but it is technically a crime. So, there are a lot of, particularly in the trucking industry, you'll see a lot of trucking companies where individual owner operators are signing a contract, and it's not really clear whether or not they're working full time for this one trucking group, or whether or not they're going to be doing some work for themselves. And so it's not unusual for us to see truckers who are 1099s versus W-2s. And frankly, the tax form that you get does not dictate whether or not you're an employee. A lot of people think, well, I got a 1099, so I can't be an employee. And that's not true.
Right.
It gets complicated quick when you start talking about independent contractors.
Yeah, I bet. So for employers, just being employers ourselves, we know how kind of complicated it can be, and there's not a great system in place to kind of walk you through, like when you start a business. It's kind of like, hey, figure all this stuff out yourself, and hopefully you have everything correct and you're following the law and all of that. So just knowing how that can just simply come into play with like, wow, I just didn't know. Can an employer get workers' comp insurance after the fact? And will they cover it or no? Is it kind of like any insurance where if you're not covered at the time of the accident, they won't cover it?
You're absolutely right. If you don't have the insurance when the accident happens, it's not covered. It's kind of like a car wreck. You can't run out and get car insurance the day after you have a wreck and hope that car insurance will cover it. We see people do that sometimes.
I bet. Yeah.
I mean, would that'd be fraud, right?
Well, it's definitely a misstatement to the insurance company, but the insurance company will just look at the date of your accident and say, hey, that's not part of our coverage period. It's really dumb fraud because it's not going to work.
Right. You'll never get away with it. Sure.
So there's a coverage period listed on your declaration sheet of any insurance.
Sure.
Any insurance you buy that will show you when you're covered and when your coverage ends. And if you don't the accident doesn't happen during that period, you don't have insurance.
Right. Got it. Awesome. Okay. So, what exactly does workers' comp cover?
So I like to say that there's 3 buckets of money in workers' compensation. The really nice thing about workers' compensation is that it's not like car insurance. Car insurance, somebody runs out, and in Georgia, you can be driving around the roads with $25,000 of coverage total per person, $50,000 per accident. You'll see that on your insurance sheet, 25, 50. And that basically means that if you hurt somebody driving your car, there's only $25,000 of insurance for them, even if they're really, really hurt, even if they die. And then the individual is liable for the rest, but most people don't have any money. So the great thing about workers' compensation is that there's no policy limits, which means that if you need $2, $3, $4 million worth of care, which some of my clients have, it all gets paid for by work comp.
Wow.
Yeah. The downside to work comp is that your benefits are capped. So there's 3 buckets of money in work comp. There's wage replacement, which is the check you get every week while you're out of work hurt. And that's 2/3 of what you were earning before you got hurt. It's called your average weekly wage. You get 2/3 of that, up to a maximum of $725 a week right now. And that changes periodically. It goes up every once in a while. But for right now, if you get hurt at work, the most you can get from work comp is $725 a week for your wage replacement.
Wow. Regardless of what you make. That's interesting.
Yeah, you make $1 million a year, and the most you get under work comp is $725 a week.
Oh, dang.
So, and you'll see a lot of high wage earners don't really want to go through the work comp system because
because you could not work and still collect from that wages, right? You need to pick one or the other, or how does that work?
That's correct. Temporary total disability benefits are what you get when you're out of work, and it means you're at least temporarily totally out of work.
Right.
So you can't get that while you're working. If you go back to work and you're hurt and you're earning less than you were before you got hurt, you get temporary partial disability, which is 2/3 of the difference between what you were earning before and what you're able to earn now. And that's
Right.
also, so, you know, it's intended specifically by the Georgia legislature to not make people whole. You know, it's to encourage people to go back to work. You're not getting as much as you were before you got hurt.
Yeah.
The upside of it is that it's generally not taxable. I'm not giving tax advice, but, you know, speaking
Oh.
from, you know, you get 2/3 of what you were earning before you got hurt, you know, typically tax-free.
Right.
So that's bucket of money number one is your wage replacement. Bucket of money number two doesn't go to you. It goes to your doctors. It's medical benefits. So anything at all that the authorized doctors say you need, anything from aspirin to major surgery to home health attendant care to a prosthetic leg, all that stuff has to be paid for by workers' compensation. That's bucket of money number two. And bucket number three is permanent partial disability, which means that when you get hurt and you are permanently injured in some way, the doctor will eventually assign you an impairment rating saying, you know, that you're 10% disabled involving your leg or you're 30% disabled involving your whole body. And Rule 263 of the comp code itemizes all the different body parts you got and says how much you get paid based on how hurt you are for each of those body parts. It's kind of a gruesome annuity table.
It's intense.
It is.
That's crazy.
You know,
now, Tristan, could the client or an attorney, I guess not so much the attorney, but could the client or a patient choose which bucket to utilize, or is like all or nothing kind of thing?
well, you get all three. I mean, if you're out of work, you get the income benefits, or if you're earning less. If you are getting medical care, they're giving you medical benefits. And if you're hurt badly enough to need a lawyer, chances are you're going to have some sort of permanent impairment rating, and you'll get that too.
Okay.
And then there's a fourth category of benefits, which is open only to people who are catastrophically injured, which you know, there's 6 categories of catastrophically injured folks. But basically what it means is that you're either never going to work again, or you've lost a limb, or you have some really bad burns. And for those folks, there's additional benefits that can last your entire lifetime. Other benefits under work comp are capped, typically at 350 or 400 weeks, depending upon what you're getting.
Oh, okay. So even if you are permanently injured, but you're not catastrophically permanently injured, those benefits will eventually run out.
Bingo. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Folks who are real hurt and they're going to be hurt their whole lives, but they're not hurt so badly that they can't work anymore. And so those benefits get capped.
Got it.
Stop getting them after a certain period of time.
Now, can they? Sorry, go ahead.
And that cap is based on the case or based on the insurance? Who kind of sets that standard?
Well, the legislature set the standard, but it's based on your date of accident. So once you get hurt in work comp, you're counting down to the end of your case. And, you know, typically income benefits end after 350 weeks if you never go back to work. You know, most people go back to work within a couple months, you know, but for folks who are real injured, they may be out of work for a long time. And medical benefits get capped at 400 weeks. And again, there are exceptions to these rules. So for example, if you have a total knee replacement, then the surgical hardware can be replaced after the 400-week cap, but that gets more technical.
So what if you stop working for the employer where you had the accident, and you do go back to work? Does the workers' comp benefits of your salary replacement end as soon as you go back to work?
So the question I get usually is, hey, if I'm hurt, but I want to go back to work with a different employer, do my medical benefits end? And the answer to that is no. Your medical benefits continue until you either hit the cap, or in terms of time, or until you're better.
Got it.
Your wages, if you return to work, your income benefits, your weekly checks end unless you're on light duty work and you go back to work earning less.
Right. Got it. Okay. But
So
would the
changing
workers
employers
in
doesn't end your case.
Right. Okay. So, but I guess what I'm asking is, could people do people lie and say that they're still not working, but they're working for someone else? You know what I mean?
Uh,
Or, you know what I'm saying?
so-
Or will workers' comp find that information out somehow because they're a W-2 and they're paying taxes? Something like, I don't, are they related at all?
So that's a good question. Every insurance adjuster assumes that everyone's committing fraud all the time. Um, so that is fraud. If you are getting a weekly check
Yeah.
and you secretly go back to work for anyone, even yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you're still getting those checks every week, then that's insurance fraud, and
Mm-hmm.
you can end up going to jail for that.
Hmm.
Again,
Yeah.
it's not really particularly well enforced, but at the same time, it's not allowed. And if they find out that you've been getting weekly checks while you've been working, they can ask the judge to make you pay it all back.
Ooh.
So, occasionally the insurance companies will assign surveillance, and they'll pay an investigator to come out and keep an eye on you for a couple days to see if you're running
Wow.
work every day. And it's actually more common in work comp than it is in a lot of the personal injury claims that we see. It's not unusual. I'd say like one out of 5 to 10 of my bigger cases,
Mm-hmm.
the insurance company at some point in the case will assign surveillance to just go make sure that the person's actually hurt.
Yeah.
And they don't do
Now,
it all
what
the
if
time.
Yeah. Now, what if so the amount that you're getting paid by workers' comp, like you said, is not your full amount, even though generally it's not taxed. But say you're like, hey, it's still not enough to cover my typical benefits, or because I got hurt at this job and I also work a second job, I can't work that second job. But you find a job, say, that you can work from at home, or something that allows you to do something, that won't inhibit your injury or anything like that. Are people allowed to do that? Or once you're working in any capacity, that's it?
So I think the question is that if you're out of work hurt and you have the opportunity to take some sort of light duty job, are
Right.
you allowed to do that to try to make some more money? And
Right.
the short answer is, if you're doing it above board and being honest about it, then you can. And if you go back to work in a second job, well, if you're out of work hurt and you go back to work in light duty, then the insurance company will be entitled to convert your benefits from temporary total benefits to temporary partial benefits.
Right.
And you'll get less on a weekly basis from the insurance company, but you may be closer to being made whole.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got a lawyer, you're going to want to talk with your lawyer about that and make a decision strategically before you go and run back to work, because that can have major impact on your case and how much it's worth, because it affects how much the insurance company's paying on a weekly basis for you. So you do have some options, but also keep in mind, work comp's never going to make you 100%. It's never going to make you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
I think that's good to know. That's a clip right there. It's workers' comp is never going to make you 100%. So 100% whole. So that's really good to understand, because I feel like people may want that, right? Why wouldn't we? But it's just not reality.
Yeah.
Well, and what I tell people is, look, this is insurance that you didn't buy. This is insurance that the employer bought for you. So it's not going to make you whole, but it's better than nothing.
True.
And it'd be really nice if work comp covered pain and suffering, but
Yeah. Hey, we actually only have about a minute left on our time, a minute and some change. Did you guys want to keep going? I know we do have some questions still, but I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we're about to be done in about a minute. If anyone else out there has any questions that might be watching, now's the time to ask before we have to thank Tristan for his time and head off. But if not, I don't know if we can sneak in one more question. I don't think so. All these questions seem to kind of always have technically, but kind of, you could do this and the other. So
the hazard of asking a lawyer a question.
and if Tristan will allow us, I would love to have Tristan back sometime and ask some more questions. I definitely learned a bunch today, and from a medical and now the legal standpoint, I definitely want to see how, one of the questions that we had, which I want to ask it on the next time so we can have spend some time talking about it. But was if a workers' comp happens while a workers' comp accident happens while driving, and then do we go the personal injury route or do we go the workers' comp route? And I think we can end with that and leave that question for next time.
Leave that for next time.
That sounds great. I'd love to come back and join
people
y'all.
wanting more.
Yeah, y'all are doing a great job, and I really appreciate the care that you're providing to clients, and just keep up the good work. And I really appreciate you inviting me to come talk with y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone is interested in reaching out to Tristan to get his legal support, his information can be found at the bottom of your screen, his telephone number, their website, and then his handle, their handles there. And then, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. Or if you kind of missed it, you can always reach out to us and we're happy to connect you guys. Thank you so much again for your time, Tristan. And I hope everyone enjoyed.
Great to see you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tristan. All right.
Bye.
Bye.